All right, everybody, welcome to Master Negotiators Live. I am your host, J.N. Raitt. I am an associate professor of management at McGill University, where I teach negotiation and conflict resolution. I'm co-hosting today with my dog, Sherilyn. She's very excited today, so I'll do my best to keep her quiet. But if you see me trying to struggle, that's what's going on. So what's Master Negotiators Live? Every week, I bring in two negotiation experts, and they can come from sales, from procurement, from management, mediation, arbitration, law, and law enforcement. And so Master Negotiators Live is all about the how-to of negotiation. There's no fluff, no abstract theories. It's all about practical advice that you can use in your everyday life. And so if you're joining us right now, please type into the chat, say hello, say where you're coming from, because from the platform where we are right now, we can't actually see you. So you need to send a comment so that we can see who you are and where you're coming from, and I'll feature the best comments on the show. We're going to start with our first segment, which is called Master Negotiator Spotlight, and I will introduce our guests. So let me just introduce the spotlight. All right, everybody. So the guests are here. So Master Negotiators Spotlight, I bring in two negotiators from different walks of life: management, sales, law enforcement, procurement, you name it, and they come to share their best tips. It's all about learning from one another. So let me introduce my two guests. We have Nicolas Passaquin, who is a chief procurement officer and global head of sourcing. He's renowned for his expertise in strategic sourcing, procurement, and supply chain optimization across various industries. His leadership in transforming operations and driving value creation has consistently delivered long-term sustainable benefits. He is also the author of two acclaimed books on supplier innovation and procurement fundamentals, and he has accepted to give away one copy of each of his books to somebody on the show today. And so if you want to join the giveaway, go on masternegotiators.live. Hello, Nicolas. Thank you so much for joining the show.
Hello, no, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward actually to the show.
Great. And so where are you joining from?
I am joining from Stockholm, from sunny Sweden actually today. Winter is going away, so that's actually part of the treat.
That's amazing. Thank you. And so our second guest is Max Bevilacqua, founder of Mindful Negotiating. He specializes in equipping organizations with mindful conflict navigation skills. He's experienced in advising Fortune 100 executives and U.S. Special Forces. He has also taught negotiation at Harvard Law School and Boston University. Max combines negotiation expertise with a strong commitment to social and environmental causes. And today he's agreed to give away a free 30-minute coaching session with one of our listeners. And so, Max, where are you joining us from, and what does a negotiation coaching session entail with you?
I'm joining you from a very happy place to be with you, JN, and you, Nicolas. More specifically and geographically, Boston, Massachusetts. And I hate to disappoint people right off the bat, but it's going to be a matter of what do you want? Like, what are your interests? Where you're trying to get, goal setting, and then a little bit of strategy in terms of thinking about how to get there.
Amazing. And so, before we go into the questions, maybe, Nicolas, can you tell us what motivated you to write your two books?
Well, first, the pleasure of writing. I think it's all started by that. I actually wrote book in French before, and they were not really good, so I scrapped them. And then there's been a day where I started doing research on specific subject, and that was actually innovation and procurement. And I was actually looking at how I could be getting up to speed, making sure I've got the right skills and expertise. And while I was doing those research, I said, yeah, maybe that's worth structuring it and putting it in a format I could share with others as well.
Okay, that's amazing. And thank you so much for contributing to the giveaway. And so I've seen a lot of people have been participating, and the winners will be announced on Saturday morning. So if you want to have a free book, a free procurement book, you can join the giveaway on masternegotiators.live, and you might get a free book. So let's start maybe with Max. Max, what motivated you to get into the negotiation field, and what keeps you interested about it? I know, big question.
I think most people are products of their families more than anything else, their families of origin. So I would say my role as a younger sibling in a lovely, privileged home where my parents didn't get along probably created a sense of the validity of two perspectives.
Right.
I then was interested in why people do things that are seemingly irrational and studied religious studies undergrad. And then for a master's, studied international negotiation because I had read Getting to Yes. I was once long haired like you, JN, with a man bun and a nose ring, recently returned from Southeast Asia. And I was the kind of person that would never shut up about being in Southeast Asia, and decided I needed to go somewhere. And I read Getting to Yes and said, wow, there are people who do this for a living. This is incredible. I want to do that.
Absolutely. And so you care about sustainability as well, and social progress. Like, do you have specific things you care about, in these domains?
I think there are two. Like, the underlying idea is just that in some ways we think good negotiators are resource conscious and are negotiating in a way that is sustainable environmentally and socially. I think a lot of our inspiration also comes from the work that we do in prisons and around the prison system in terms of looking about imbalances of power, what people are capable of, the way we judge people, et cetera, and thinking about potential. Like, at least in the US, incarceration is an enormous restraint on our human potential.
Yeah. Okay. Fascinating. Thank you. And Nicolas, so what about you? What got you into negotiation and specifically procurement, and what keeps you interested about it?
I think what keeps me interesting is probably the ability to be able to do something different every day, and then to be able to move across industries, and then to talk to people from finance, production, R&D. So you get in procurement, you get involved in so many different areas, so many functions, interact with so many people. I think that's probably what interested me first. And then secondly, I think that's not only the negotiation. I think it's a sort of broader perspective that attracted me. And the negotiation is, well, part of the fun activities, I guess. That's what makes you stay as well. I think there's so much you could do and learn, and it's a constant learning curve as well in that area. And I think you made a very good point, Max, about while you talk about sustainability and those elements. Quite a lot of people got in mind that negotiation is like, I just want a better price. But actually, It's a lot more than that. And you can have very positive influence by actually putting together the right negotiation strategy, much beyond just financial value.
Absolutely. And so maybe, Max, can you, I always like to ask this question, but can you tell us what's your number one negotiation tip?
It's really obnoxious. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Tips don't work.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. And I mean, that is, I guess, a tip, but the idea, and so I'm so with you. And what you're doing, I'm right with in terms of like, let's take negotiation and let's demystify it. It's not something that needs to be saved for grad school. It should be taught in kindergarten. So I'm with that. And there's a saying that I really like, that there's nothing as practical as a theory. And so for me, the theory underneath negotiation is double loop learning. This is Chris Argyris from Harvard Education School. Just the idea that we can't just tell someone to do something differently. We have to draw their awareness to how they think about the activity and how that relates to the choices they do or don't see.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. What about you, Nicolas? Do you have a tip, a negotiation tip to give people?
Yeah, I feel a bit bad now saying that, but yeah, I think for me, for me, it's a lot about the positive attitude. It's just stay kind. I think just differentiating between the personal relationship and what you are trying to achieve. So like expressing gratitude, showing interest in others' position, and then just create that constructive atmosphere. It's not a fight. It's not a battle. It's actually, well, you're going to get further away if you can actually build that relationship.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. It's interesting. It's something that I was actually thinking about what you were saying this morning, because I was thinking that when you teach, when you're in academia, you realize pretty quickly that your own attitude as a professor has a huge impact on the mood of the group. And so if you arrive and you're excited and you're happy and you have a big smile, it's such a big difference compared to if you're kind of like just sad and depressed and moping around. So I think, I'm always so careful, to just bring a good energy to the room. And I think it's also valid for the negotiation table. I agree with you. Maybe, Max, what do you think is a mistake people typically make in negotiations?
I think bringing the negative attitude. I think Nicolas did a fantastic job of taking my unhelpful answer and putting it into a tip, which is the way you see it. And so the big shift is from scarcity to abundance, from zero sum to potential gain. right? The idea that someone's gain does not have to does not necessarily infringe on you or where you can get. And Nicholas, I'd be really curious about your perspective too, in terms of like the total value of a contract, because someone, say in procurement, at least in our experience, might say something like, we want a better price. But when we tap the interest under the position, they care about value. Well, it turns out that if we consider the length of the relationship, it could be more dollars, but you have to actually care about the relationship too. So thinking positively is I think a great way to enter.
What do you think about that, Nicolas?
No, I fully agree. And I think for me, it comes as well with the idea that people are not preparing enough. They just come not knowing exactly what they want. And I think that's probably the worst that can happen. And quite often they narrow it to, well, to value, to financial, to something which might not actually be the first target or the first objective of the negotiation. And that's generally how and you undermine your own position by not preparing yourselves.
And so it's always very confusing to me why people treat negotiation this way, because it seems that if there was some sort of any other type of skill they had to demonstrate, like I always say, like playing tennis, if you knew that you had a tennis match next week against a tennis pro, you would not just show up unprepared. I mean, you would kind of like maybe buy a tennis racket, you would try on the wall or something. But negotiations, people just show up. Like they have no idea what's going to happen. They often sometimes don't realize the other party is a pro, which is a lot of times, people in sales, people in recruitment, people in procurement. And they don't even know what they want. And so how can they even know if they had a good deal? They have no data point whatsoever. Why do you think that is, you guys? Like, I don't know, Max, do you have an opinion about this? Why is it that people treat negotiation this way?
I think, at least from my little neck of the woods, it's about adult development. And not saying I'm super developed here or anything, but I think the idea that we can articulate our limitations, or even have language, or even put language around the things that are so big and scary that they own us. Like we always say, like, name it to tame it, right? So we have to find and have language. And I didn't discover language to talk about like a taxonomy of negotiation behaviors until graduate school. Why? So for me, it's an absence of education and awareness training.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a really, really good point, which is if you approach a negotiation emotionally, kind of like with your gut feelings, you're going to do terrible. Like this is going to be really bad, but you can't do any other way unless you have the method, right? Like getting to yes is a great example of a method where it teaches you, it was the first step towards like, here is a framework, here is a behavior we're expecting, and don't react, like just try to be strategic. What do you think, Nicolas?
I actually like your tennis playing example you shared earlier. You are actually going to get prepared. You're going to think about what you're going to do. You're going to train yourself. You're going to buy a new racket. You're going to get ready for that, actually. And that's exactly what people are not doing or not thinking about. They think actually they could that naturally. I don't believe there is natural negotiator. I think there is just actually you might have quality that might help you along the way. But the difference in between good and great would actually be that prep work, that training, the time you're going to put into getting ready to be on the court.
So do you agree with that, Max, that there's no natural great negotiators?
I think we'd have to define what we mean by negotiation, because what's effective and what's skillful is different.
Right.
I generally enjoy the sentiment because I actually think that most of us, including myself, should lay down the title of expert or even master, because I'm someone who struggles with it tremendously. I struggle with it so much that I think about it. That's a lot of us. So for me, like, and Jay, and I'm also curious about how you think about this as a teacher, because in some ways my experience learning has been show, don't tell, demonstrating what effective communication looks like by doing it in the moment and facilitating understanding and development. But sometimes the idea of like a lecturer or expert or master negotiator is tell us what to do. So I'm curious what you think about where you stand in the room.
So so I'm going to answer. And before, I want to say that I don't include myself in the master negotiators. To me, that's you guys. Like no. Like when I say master negotiators, I'm talking about you. The reason I'm so passionate about negotiation and I don't seem to lose interest is because I'm not good at it. I'm not naturally a gifted negotiator. And I've seen, and here's the thing. I've seen people. So I was under the impression when I started teaching negotiation in McGill, I was under the impression that me alone had issues with assertiveness, had issues with saying no, had issues with expanding the pie. And I thought nobody else shared that, and that people were perfectly balanced and adjusted and all that stuff. And I was just there to teach them advanced negotiation techniques. The first semester I taught negotiation, I realized I was wrong. I realized that most people, the overwhelming majority of people, are poor negotiators naturally. It's because they go with their instinct, and instinct is fight, flight, freeze, which is really not adapted to a complex social situation like a negotiation. Yeah. And so the reason I'm so passionate about it is because there is a method that's not that hard. Like the negotiation method is not that complicated or that hard, but for an emotional being, it's hard. For a computer, it would be easier. For an emotional being, it's actually really tricky. And it's really easy for people to lose focus of what they're trying to get. It's really easy for people to get upset. I see it. I organize a negotiation competition every year at McGill with MBA groups, and every year I have somebody who gets very upset. And it's really interesting because you'd think, right? You're a trained negotiator. You know about this. Yeah. Why are you getting upset? You know, but it's because it's hard. So I think I've very, very rarely seen naturally gifted negotiators, but I've seen some of them. And I actually have class activities, you know, it's all simulation based. And so I have class activities where you can really see the ones that naturally don't make the mistakes that most people make. One of them, for example, is being able to say no and walk away. That's really something that people have such a hard time doing. And I have a hard time doing it too, naturally. But I've learned, you know, to just not rely on my instincts and on my fears and my intuition, and to just kind of like look at it from a very practical standpoint. Very similar than, you know, than any other skill, like a tennis skill. Why would I use my instinct? Like, I don't know. I don't have any tennis instinct. Like, I don't know. I need to learn. It's a skill. I need to learn how to use a racket. But I'm always worried. I don't know what you guys think, but sometimes, you know, people tell us, oh, I'm a great negotiator. And yeah, I'm always a bit worried when people say that, because I don't know what they mean, right? Like, do you mean you're very aggressive? Like, typically that's what they mean. Yeah. What do you think is a great negotiator for you? Maybe Nicolas, what's a great negotiator?
Well, I think it goes back to what you said earlier. What's actually negotiation? And I think we do that on our day-to-day life. Actually, in reality, you negotiate 100 times a day with your partner, with your kids, and actually that's part of that you need to bring when you actually need to do it professionally. So a great negotiator is exactly what you described. There is a mix of attitude and behavior, and remain calm and follow the plan. And then there is that part which is around, well, preparing yourselves to get to those negotiations. Now, there is as well an element on there that's, for me, is important for people to understand. And that's probably goes back to what you say around being master or expert. Is like, well, we like tennis playing. We are not all going to be Rafael Nadal, because you can train as hard as you want. You're never going to get there. So there is anyway a little bit of a gift, an attitude, something which is going to make the top 10 versus the top 100. And that maybe you couldn't get. But then that's probably only a few people in the world.
Yeah, and interestingly, one of the reasons I'm comfortable teaching negotiation is because people are so terrible naturally that it's almost like teaching swimming. You know, I'm not teaching. I don't feel like my only goal, or I'm hired by McGill to just teach Olympic athletes. I'm just teaching people not to drown. Like that's what I'm doing, and so. It's really easy so that's my expertise. Like, in my opinion, I'm a negotiation expert. In that way, yes, I can teach people not to drown, and I can teach people like to kind of like stand their ground and learn how to say no, and learn how to ask for what they want and do the calculations and all that stuff. But then, you know, the really excellent negotiators, there are so few of them. It's so rare. It's really the same thing as the Olympic athletes. It's kind of like if you play basketball, you can teach basketball to everybody, but at some point somebody's going to be 8 foot tall, and that's going to be one person in 100 million people.
Yeah.
And they're just going to dominate the game. But it doesn't mean that you can't have basketball coaches all over the world, giving the love for basketball to people who are 6 foot tall. It's so that, to me, that's really what I care about. I used to be in the rowing team when I was in business school. And so I did competitions and all that stuff. And we had a trainer who actually was not a rower. He was not a rower. He never had won anything, but his perspective was from training. Like, his perspective was from seeing people do it. And so it was just like a different thing. It's a different skill. Do you see that as well, Max? Like, that there is a different skill between like teaching something and then actually doing it?
I think about this all the time. So the first thing, I think, just to put you back in the category of expert negotiator, I think there's a writer, Thomas Mann, who said that a writer is a person for whom writing is more difficult. And I think the same is true for a negotiator. So there's, I think, something of like a confidence paradox, that those of us who have overconfidence bias are precisely the people that could use some help. But the barrier is that they wouldn't ask, or they don't think they need. They think they can just show up. But most people are just showing up and responding, not even responding, reacting to whatever the other person does. So if the other person doesn't react or lead with cooperation, it's going to be tough. I think that a person can be a fantastic trainer, therapist, all these kinds of things, coach, without being able to play. And I think I think sometimes a player, like I work with a family therapist, Jody Shire, who's so lovely that when she's doing doubling in psychodrama, she can't even explain it. She's in flow. She's LeBron James. So I think to some extent, you could even argue that it's easier for a person who is not a player, never has been, who's just observed, to convey that to someone else. But I also am someone that has spent so much time in front of the room talking about it, that the imposter syndrome has led me to want to be much more of a practitioner, which also then informs my ability to teach and say, okay, this might be something that comes up for you. And then also, last thing, just understanding negotiation as not just a one-on-one thing, but part of a system where we all negotiate differently, and like our appearance affects that. And then also just the idea that it's a process and not an event. It doesn't happen in a dramatic moment at a table with a handshake, always, sometimes maybe, but it's a process that starts well before and lurks there with implementation too.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think, Nicolas, about the difference between teaching and actually doing?
No, I fully agree of that. And I do remember actually a team I was managing, and then we definitely had someone who was like a top player, and we were putting him on all of our largest, more complex negotiations. And then at one stage we said, let's actually try to have him as an expert train others, and it didn't work. He just didn't have that attitude. He was not able to structure his thoughts back to others. So he was actually good at sharing how you should be preparing, but then there's a number of things that he was not able to articulate and explain. So I agree. I think it's actually a different type of skills and expertise. Great trainer and coaches are not always a great practitioners, and vice versa.
Amen.
And in fact, you could make the argument, right, that people who naturally have a talent at something probably are not very good at teaching it, because they don't understand, the difficulty of it. If you think Mozart or some champion somewhere, to them it makes sense. Like, they didn't have to figure it out, so maybe they're not the best people. Mozart is not the best people to talk about, playing the piano or whatever, because what would he know about somebody, who sucks at it, who's just not that talented at it? But yeah, I mean, to me, like, there is also, and before we go to the next topic, but there is also this disconnect, which is negotiation is this thing that everybody does. We don't know how many times a day, right? Because it depends on, could be 100 times a day, it depends on where you put the boundary, right? You even negotiate with yourself. Yes. But for some people, but for some reason, people are really bad at it. Like, what do you think that is? Why are people not great at negotiating when it's such an important skill? Maybe Max, do you want to go first?
You said it, because we're negotiating primarily with ourselves. And there's a relationship between the negotiations we're having internally and the many voices and systems and, history from our families, and the way we enroll other people to like play out that psychodrama and the repetition compulsion. Like, the person you struggle with at work, likely reminds you of someone in your family or in your
Yes.
past. So I think it's because we're not as aware, and I think it's much less sexy to talk about internal, mindful things that, at least I would say in the US, are categorized as feminine, right? And negotiation, which is like, I think, typically gendered, typically more men, and in some ways it's kind of like someone in the NBA teaching people under 6 feet to play basketball. It's different. We walk around in different bodies and with different things. So I think people are less aware themselves, or afraid of themselves, or don't like themselves, and that's the assertiveness problem. And then I think some people also are just out of touch with reality to an extent. I mean, that's not a great thing to say. Are just, overly assertive and unaware of how they're even hurting themselves with that behavior by not adding in some empathy as well.
We had Giuseppe Conti said something a few weeks ago on the show that really stuck with me. He said that people are confused getting assertive and being aggressive, and because they don't want to be aggressive, they're not assertive.
Amen.
Because to them it's the same thing, and it really stuck with me because it does seem like something that makes a lot of sense. People are so worried about burning bridges. People are so worried about being perceived negatively, and I train. A lot of my students are not executives, they're undergrads. And so they're like 19 years old, 20 years old. And so they're right out of childhood where, nobody wants an assertive kid. Like, kids have to kids have to do what they're told. Like, they stay sitting down for 8 hours a day. They do whatever they're told. They're driven from one place to another. Like, they're not making that many decisions. And then suddenly they have to be on the job market, and they have to say no, and they have to defend themselves and all that stuff. It's like this entire muscle they've never used, and then suddenly they have to use it. It's really rough. Like, it's very difficult. And before I give you the microphone, Nicolas, I want to say Barney is like making a lot of great comments about win-win deals in the comment section. And so if you have comments about what we're saying, or you have questions, please post it in the comments, and I'll be happy to feature it on the screen. Thank you. So Nicolas, what do you think? Why are people not better at negotiating?
Because they see that as not something critical in their day-to-day life. They don't realize that they actually negotiate. Well, obviously, when you are going to go and ask for a salary raise, you're going to get prepared. You're going to think about how you're going to approach that. And then because you've got that emotion that might be counter-constructive during the conversation, you might get out off track. But then if you prepare well, actually you could get there. The problem is that most of the negotiation, you're actually not prepared for that, because they happen all day long, and it might be with your colleagues, with your partner, and you don't even think about it as a negotiation. So you are actually just reacting to an external event, and then you are reacting with who you are, with your personality, your attitude and behavior, and probably going away from what we said earlier, to be kind, be open, look at expanding the pie. It will work when you think about it. But then 90% of the time, you won't think about what you do as being negotiations.
Yeah, and also I feel like so much of modern society, it first of all is very recent. We've developed for 200,000 years or 2 million years or whatever, and modern society is like 100 years old. Where we have cities with millions of people. It's so recent. Like cubicles and all that stuff. This didn't exist 1,000 years ago. Like, this is really something that's very recent. But fight or flight has been going on for millions of years. And so I feel like it's a very recent skill we're asking people to develop. Nicolas, you want to say something?
No, I was just thinking about what you said. I was trying to put that into my context, which is cultural differences as well. I moved in several countries, and I think there is a time element. Yes, I think that's something that might be true. It's evolved during those centuries and years and millennia. But I think at the same time, there is as well, we are all different. And I think the culture influences it quite a lot as well. People actually would behave very differently in Japan or Sweden or in the US. And actually that influences how you negotiate as well, and how you deal with your day-to-day life. And people don't translate always that as well,
right,
into how they approach it.
Yeah. But I think even, absolutely, there is absolutely cultural differences. But I think society demands compliance. We have to be compliant with a lot of rules. We have to be compliant with what our bosses is saying, our parents, the law, all that kind of stuff. And I feel like people are using compliance as a conflict management tool. You're aggressively asking me for something. I'm just going to comply, so it's going to go away, right? So I don't have to deal with it. But unfortunately, there are situations when that doesn't work, and I think the one we're going to see that in the next segments. But the main one is when people are asking for a promotion, or when people are asking for a raise or applying for a job. They realize, well, if I comply, I'm going to get screwed over. Like, it's not going to work out well for me. And so now suddenly they have to do this like new skill. Okay, you guys, so this is the end of the very first segment. I'm going to switch to our next segment. So let me play it. And so the next segment is called Master Negotiators Tactics. All right, everybody. So I'm going to refresh the room. So in case you're just joining us, this is Master Negotiators Tactics. My name is Jay Reid. I'm an associate professor of management at McGill University, where I teach negotiation and conflict resolution. I'm co-hosting with my dog, Sherilyn, who's very, very super active right now, but I'm trying to keep her busy because she barks also a lot. And so I'm doing my best. So in this segment, we focus on practical role playing, but of course, not in a weird way, in just a regular way. I will use a deck of cards that I have designed for my negotiation classes, and each card features a negotiation situation. So your task, if you're my guest, is to role play how you would approach the situation. So I think it's really mostly useful so that people can know, what would you say in that situation? How would you approach it? So it's all about demonstrating negotiation tactics in action. If you're in the chat, you can play as well. You can make comments and I'll feature them in the screen. So let me introduce my two guests. My first guest is Nicolas Passaquin. He's a chief procurement officer and global head of sourcing. He's renowned for his expertise in strategic sourcing, procurement, and supply chain optimization across various industries. His leadership in transforming operations and driving value creation has consistently delivered long-term sustainable benefits. He is the author of 2 acclaimed books on supplier innovation and procurement fundamentals. Hello, Nicolas. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, thanks. Thanks for having me on the show, and I'm looking forward actually to that section.
Yeah, perfect. And so then our next guest is Max Bevilacqua. He's the founder of Mindful Negotiating. He specializes in equipping organizations with mindful conflict navigation skills. He is experienced in advising Fortune 100 executives and U.S. Special Forces. And he has also taught negotiation at Harvard Law School and Boston University. Max combines negotiation expertise with a strong commitment to social and environmental causes. Hello, Max. Thank you so much for joining us.
This is my favorite thing to talk to other practitioners. Thanks for having me.
That's amazing. And so before we get into the segment, what's mindful negotiation?
So glad you asked. To keep it short, I think negotiation is a masculine coding of communication. I think there's very little difference. Like, yes, there's a difference between a conversation and a negotiation in its search for agreement, and there being actual discernible issues and a problem. But I think the distinction is really thin. And so I wanted to add an adjective to negotiation, kind of like Chris Voss talks about tactical empathy. Takes empathy, which is an important thing, and adds tactical, which I think makes it more masculine, proximate to violence, etc. So I wanted to do the opposite with negotiating, which is already, I think, just kind of a coded word, and add mindfulness and just talk about doing it intentionally, because that's what we're here to do. Like, if we were just more aware, we could all do a bit better. Excellent.
And so let me add the screen. I'm going to do it this way, and I'm going to do it that way. Perfect. So if you're joining us, we're very, very lucky. Nicolas is giving away 1 copy of each of his books. And so you can go on masternegotiators.live so that you can have a chance to win one of the books. There are 2 different books, Procurement and the book. And then we have Procurement and Innovation. And so who are these books for? Like, who would benefit the most from these books, Nicolas?
I think generally that would be targeted more to people having an interest in procurement but not being procurement professional yet or wanted to develop. I think especially the first one, these sort of fundamentals, they are structured in a way that will help people just to think about the different areas and know why it's important and where they should be developing. The other one is actually much more targeted on innovation and how you would actually be structuring a platform within your company to actually drive suppliers innovation. So it's a lot more practical. It could be from all level in the organization, in procurement or outside, on how you would actually approach innovation to get the best out of your suppliers in that space.
That's amazing. And so the next part of our giveaway is Max has generously accepted to give away a 30-minute coaching session. And so you were saying earlier, Max, that it could involve anything, right?
If I do my job right, it will look like adding some language to, or some concreteness around what you care about, what your goals are, and then thinking about how to get there.
Excellent. And so let me just show you the different scenarios. And so this one is, how does one person negotiate a discount for a bulk order? And so this is typical, you're going to buy something and you decide, what if I buy a lot of it? Can I get a discount? Nicolas, how would you approach this one?
Well, I think it probably depends of the industry you are in. Just making an apartheid, I think there's industry where actually having larger volume is not going to help you that much. So you probably need to think about it first before you are going to go and ask for a discount. Then,
can you give us an example of a situation where a larger volume wouldn't lead to a discount?
Well, if you go into event, as example, and you are actually organizing in an event in a specific city, if you want 1,000 hotel rooms, well, maybe there's not enough capacity. So you would actually not get a better price for 1,000. You'll probably get a better price for 500. Because then the volume would be detrimental to the industry and they would actually not be interested to give you the best price because you take the entire capacity.
That's a really good point. Like, I'm part of this conference every year that's called the Academy of Management. And every year we're like 15,000 people and we kind of flood a city, right? And we book all the hotels and everything. And I agree that it becomes the Academy of Management. There is nothing else going on. Like, people going in restaurants, it's just the Academy of Management. That's a very good point. So, but let's just imagine that you could get, how would you approach a vendor to try to get a discount for a bulk order?
I would first think about what actually it means for him, basically, in terms of fixed cost versus variable. And I think the larger the fixed cost, the better it's going to be for the negotiation. So when you are going to anchor your ask, you can think about that. So to negotiate that, I would definitely think about the size of the order versus the fixed cost to produce 1 versus 1,000. That's one. And then the other things I would think as well about is making sure that I would actually start by having the sort of lower ask and lower volumes, and then you can actually get with your ask afterwards. So don't start by saying, I want that million. I probably want, first 500,000, and then you can think about discount on bulk order and by ramping it up. So you anchor it at a lower level.
Excellent. Thank you. What about you, Max? How would you approach a vendor to get a discount for a volume?
I would ask Nicolas. Like I would go with the industry expert. But I think my generic answer is to do a 7-element prep. We really like the 7 elements, which is derived from a few different fields over time. Number one, what's my relationship like with this person? Right? Is it the first time I'm meeting them? Is it a bad relationship? Is it a good relationship? Do I need to be to what extent do I need to separate relationship and the substance? Communication. What messages do I want to send? What questions do I want to ask? Interests. Am I primarily motivated by money or price today or money today? Or is cross-marketing or, a longer term relationship potentially valuable? What options could we come up with? What are the objective criteria in this? What are the benchmarks in this industry? Like, what is normal? I want to be treated fairly and using fairness as a sword and a shield, as they say. So looking for precedent and doing research. And that's kind of like back to Nicolas' point as well about preparation is so huge. So a lot of negotiation happens away from the table. You gotta research those numbers. Like, I don't want to end up in that situation without having done that prep. Then also, what will I do if I don't get this deal? Do I have a better alternative? And if I do get this deal, what does implementation look like in terms of timeline and all that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Nicolas, you wanted to say something?
No, I just wanted, I was actually thinking about a comment I've heard earlier, actually, in in certain countries, and that would include France, for example, you cannot actually be more than 30% of the volume of your supplier. So that actually might be detrimental to bulk orders or to larger volumes, because then they would not be able to accept. So that goes back to what Max said. I think the prep is actually the most important part of the negotiation. And that's valid for bulk order, but I think it's valid actually for most of the negotiation. You need to do your research.
Excellent. Okay, so let's see another one. So let's think about negotiate an extended warranty at no cost. So let's imagine you're buying an electronics or something like that, and you want to have a longer warranty. How would you approach that? Maybe Nicolas, do you have advice?
Well, yeah, I would definitely ask questions and listen first about the quality of the product and how sure they are it's going to be the perfect product, and how they never had any return, and etc. And that's probably where I would come and say, well, actually, that's a good point, because then you can extend warranty because you are so sure that your product is perfect. So I would probably frame it in a way to just lead to that point where they would be struggling to say no to that kind of request.
Right. So you get them to talk first about how great the product is and how certain they are that it's not going to fail, and then to say then it shouldn't be a problem for you, right, to extend the warranty.
Exactly.
Is it something that you do in your job? Like, what do you negotiate in your job, by the way, Nicolas?
Well, I work for a telecom company, so I think definitely we can have those kind of conversations, because we buy infrastructure and network, and we buy actually, pieces of equipment that are definitely under warranty, and we actually have conversation around that. Yes.
And how do you decide how long the warranty should be?
I think it depends what you are buying. It's as well part of knowing your product. And I think that's where you need to have a relationship with your stakeholders, because they will have that technical knowledge and that understanding of actually what kind of risk you have with the different kind of equipment you're going to purchase. I think we are not asking our procurement people or myself actually to be specialists in all of the technical specificities. So you actually build relationship internally, and you actually leverage those people to prep yourself and to have those conversations basically.
Excellent. Thank you. Max, I have a question for you. And so we're going to do like a different domain. And I'm kind of thinking there is something that I've seen pop up and people have asked me about it. And I think it's an issue people have. But how do you address a noisy roommate? You have a roommate and they're very, very noisy.
Oy.
And you just need them to stop. Like you just need them to chill, to calm down. How would you approach it? Because you're living with that person. Right. So you don't want to burn that bridge. You don't want to make it uncomfortable. But at the same time, you also want them to be less noisy.
Yeah. The generic advice I have is to speak in terms of your interests, right? Not to speak in terms of the position, which is to say, I want you to be less noisy, or with the frame of it being infringing on your autonomy, and more about, hey, I really wanted to get into med school or studying, and something that a need that I have for that is quiet. I'm sure this isn't your intention when it is noisy in these specific behaviors that I'm going to try and not use judgment laden language with. It's difficult for me. What could we do to figure that out? So enrolling in the process rather than like commanding. Autonomy is a sensitivity for, I think, all people for good reason. And for me, having had a rich tapestry of previous roommates, I have some roommates who I've known since I was a child, and I would say like, look, I love you, man, and can you shut up? Right?
Yeah.
Like there's that. And then
you can say that to somebody you know really well.
Also, some dudes are scary. Like I've lived with some scary dudes, and there are people that I would just be like, you know what? As you're thrashing around and breaking things, my best response is an alternative, which is to live somewhere else.
Yeah. So that's also something, right? Which is like sometimes, things don't work out and then you can just go somewhere else. Do you have any advice on, when and where this conversation should be happening?
I want to.
No, but Max. Max. Do you have let's continue. Like, do you have advice on? And then we'll go to Nicolas. Like, where, if you had to choose when and where to have this conversation, when would that go?
It should be thoughtful, right? You should think about it. Like you should have thought about it. I don't know about being prescriptive. When we click on the double click on this, the communication element where we put the container of the conversation, where is it happening? Who's there? Is there food present? Are we talking before or after the meal? Blah, blah, blah.
Are there weapons on the table? Like, that kind
Exactly.
of stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
The framing of the container matters tremendously. And so just be thoughtful. And I think things that typically help both judges with their decision making, and I even think allowing students into colleges, did you eat a good meal, a good healthy meal?
Right.
So I want to
Yeah.
structure it like I want some control. I want to exert as much control as is appropriate over that container.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Nicolas, how would you do that if you had a noisy roommate? How would you approach
Yeah,
it?
I definitely, well, I agree with Max. I think there's a lot about the framing and when you do it, and that might be actually, well, it's actually probably part of the things you need to think about. You probably don't want to go there when you are actually angry and out
Yeah.
of your mind, and that's not the right time. It's just going to be a fight, and it's not going to be constructive. Likewise, you need to think about the person you are going to talk to. He needs to be in that listening mode as well. And there's times where it's just not the right moment to just go there and try to have those conversations. So yeah, the
Yeah.
timing for me is quite important.
And I think what one of the mistakes sometimes that people make is they make a lot of assumptions about why the person is noisy, and so they assume that it's because they're disrespectful, they're not respecting your boundaries, and because they have no just rational answer to that, they just let it escalate emotionally up until they just blow up, and then it becomes this anger thing. But nobody, it just makes things worse. Nobody wants to be yelled at, it just makes you want to continue doing it. What do you think, Nicolas? I see you
No,
seem to.
I agree, and you shouldn't wait for too long. Actually, you shouldn't wait
Yeah.
for weeks and weeks. You actually should try to have those conversations very early on, because then when it starts bubbling up and you get angry about it, and then it's just going to become something massive that could have been fixed much earlier. And sometimes actually, and that's what Max said as well, I think sometimes you can't fix it, and the best solution is just to search for an alternative. And we might talk about that. It's like your bat now, but for your personal life.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember, so I haven't had roommates in years, but I remember when I was a grad student in New York, I had several roommates, and with most it went really great. But then I was with this woman who was French as well, and it started really well. But in her mind, like, she was creating all sorts of scenarios as to, why I was doing what I was doing. And she was just not sharing at all. And she was kind of like waiting for like the time where she couldn't take it anymore to just finally express herself. It's really hard to deal with somebody like that because they've escalated so much. Like, they approach you when they're so angry, and they're talking about stuff, they're inferring your intention, right? Like, they're saying you do this because of that, and you're like, well, you're not in my head, you don't know why I'm doing this. You're making an assumption. In psychology they call that an attribution. But it's yeah, don't be that person. Like, try to be the person who, if you feel like something might become a problem in the future, just find, if I'm understanding what you guys are saying, find the right moment. So, which is not when the person is out the door to go to class, right? It's a moment when they're relaxed, they're fed, and you can just tell them, hey, by the way, I've noticed this. I was wondering if, we could find a compromise, or if we could find a way to work together. Okay, so let's see what other scenario I have picked. I have maybe this is another one that's procurement. So let's do this one, and then we'll switch to the last part of the show. Have you ever negotiated that, Nicolas, like guarantee a price match with a competitor?
We actually negotiate audit clause where we would say, actually, if we find a better price or a price match, we would actually have that. So yes, I think we definitely have that with certain type of suppliers, especially within BPO and outsourcing, and we definitely have those kind of price match guarantee, even though we call that slightly differently, but I think it's what it means probably. It's not always common. I think it's generally quite tough negotiation to get to that. Now it goes back a little bit to the warranty and quality we talked about, because they've got so much argument around we are the best and you are not going to find any better deals, and we are not going to guarantee A, B, and C. Well, then that's actually support those kind of negotiations as well. But that's not an easy one generally.
Yeah.
Plus, I never really saw it being enforced as well. So we had that in a couple of contracts, and we actually went back, and it's actually very difficult to just compare and get that into force.
Because it's not exactly the same product, right? It's never exactly the same thing.
it's never exactly the same thing. And then, well, you need to think as well about the relationship as well. I guess it depends of the suppliers you are dealing with and the industry, but I think that's the kind of things you'd go down that route. It's actually can be quite tough as well afterward to maintain an healthy relationship with your supplier. So maybe that's like almost a technique to walk away at one stage.
Yeah, or maybe to go with a competitor, right? Like if the competitor is already cheaper. And so maybe like to finish, I have another one for you, Max. But so the one that people always ask about is how to ask for a salary raise. And so that's something I don't know a lot of people who think they're paid fairly. Most people think they should be paid more. But the thing is, there's this silent affliction where they just don't ask about it, they don't talk about it, they just quit and then they go somewhere else. So before quitting, why not ask? And so how would you ask if you wanted to ask for a higher salary?
This for me?
Yep.
I think two things. One, the first question is, why do you want that salary? And I know that might sound silly or obvious. It's probably money. Okay. But is it like a cash flow thing, like you take a bonus, or is the bonus so highly taxed that it has to be your base salary because you want to set a precedent for your next negotiation? Or is maybe an upgrade in title something that's big? Or is it just like, I mean, Jan, I think you can make the argument that fundamental attribution error is the fundamental problem of negotiation.
Yeah.
Right. Like
yeah.
Anything that impacts me poorly, I assume you did that for that purpose. Right. And that's a function of evolution. Kind of, I think you're talking, and I think just a great way about how necessary negotiation training or development is, given how recent the need for negotiating or for like reckoning with our biology and neurochemistry. But to actually answer the question directly, I think I just would want to add the mindset piece of you can have a conflict or make an ask and strengthen your relationship. Not only not damage it, but make it closer. Like I know people that I've been in conflict with who I now consider myself closer to having been through that. So I think at least for me, it was kind of revolutionary when I read through the program on negotiation literature, like that relationship and substance are separate. So I'd be very clear to separate those in a salary negotiation, consider my relationship with that person as well as the relationships they're having with the back office, which to me is the hardest part of salary negotiations, which is the person that you're negotiating with actually the decision maker and what are the other constraints they're facing? But basically think about sitting in their shoes, in their chair, and consider what would objectively make the case for you to be paid more. If payment, salary, or bonus is most important to you, or are you feeling underappreciated? And guess what? Like many of us, myself included, suffer from overconfidence bias. Most people think that they're above average in intelligence, above average listeners. So I think there's also this humility of needing to say, like, to what extent am I bringing in my own issues of worth? And then also considering, just to throw this curveball in, our attachment style. Do I tend to be avoidant because that's what was protective to me in my family unit? Like I see a lot of it, especially in like the quiet quitting, I see avoidance. And people, and there are times where it's good to avoid and we suggest it, but sometimes we should collaborate, sometimes we should compromise, sometimes we should compete, and maybe sometimes we should accommodate. So
absolutely. And I think increasing the repertoire of what you can say in a negotiation is important, because otherwise you're going to rely on reactions and people have different reactions, like I know for me, like, the fight flight freeze, like a lot of people, it's the flee or it's the freeze. I know for me, it's the fight. And so like for me, I'm like everybody, right? Like I have my blind spots and I work on them. But I think, I know that whenever I get to this automatic reaction, I always regret it. Like it never brings me what I want. Even when I end up with the deal I want, I'm always thinking I could have gotten it a different way. And so my dog has completely destroyed her thing. It's insane. Oh my God, why does she have so much energy? It's crazy. Okay, so I think this is time for us to go to the last segment, which is one of my favorite segments, where we're actually going to be talking about Reddit posts. And so let me just go and play the little jingle, and then we will do the last segment. Hello, everybody. This is Master Negotiators Q&A, and this is a segment where I feature seasoned negotiators answering real questions from Reddit. And so our negotiation experts provide concrete advice on a range of topics, from managing everyday conflicts to mastering complex business negotiations. So today I am joined by two master negotiators. The first one is called Nicolas Passaquin. He is a chief procurement officer and global head of sourcing. He is renowned for his expertise in strategic sourcing, procurement, and supply chain optimization across various industries. His leadership in transferring operations and driving value creation has consistently delivered long-term sustainable benefits. He is the author of 2 acclaimed books on supplier innovation and procurement fundamentals. Hello, Nicolas. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, no, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to coming questions.
And so you're located in Stockholm right now. And so have you learned Swedish? Do you speak Swedish?
No, I don't. I understand Swedish, but Swedish is a tough language.
It's a very tough language. And so the second master negotiator today is Max Bevilacqua. He's the founder of Mindful Negotiating. He specializes in equipping organizations with mindful conflict navigation skills. He is experienced in advising Fortune 100 executives and U.S. Special Forces, and he has taught negotiation at Harvard Law School and Boston University. Max combines negotiation expertise with a strong commitment to social and environmental causes. Hello, Max. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Have you ever met Moshe Cohen from Boston University? Good friend of mine.
Ollie Wobbles is a great.
Yeah.
The listening triangle is something we regularly use. He's in that, in the Boston area where there's this kind of little pool of us, and he's at BU. And so when I was teaching at BU's business school, I often met with Moshe Cohen. Yeah.
What I really like about his book is it's really a book. It's the first time you see somebody who really understands that most people are nervous negotiating. Yes.
Yeah.
Most books, they don't even talk about it. They assume that you're going to show up to the negotiation table and then they give you the tools for the negotiation table. But they don't understand that most people will not even show up. Most people will just shut up and just not even show up to the negotiation table. And he gets it. And so that's really what I like about his book and what I like about Moshe.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me share my screen and we will get into the Reddit questions. Let me share this. Okay. And we're going to do it this way. So before we get into this, so thank you so much, you guys. You're both contributing to the giveaway. And so every week I organize a Master Negotiators giveaway. And Nicolas is contributing his 2 books. And so you can go on masternegotiators.live and enter the giveaway for a chance to win this book, or Procurement and Innovation, which is his second book. Thank you so much, Nicolas. And Max has generously agreed to give away a 30-minute coaching session. So if you have an upcoming negotiation, something that you don't know how to deal with, well, you have an expert in negotiation that can give you really targeted advice so that you can do better and you can have the deal you want. So let me show you a little bit the questions that I have selected for today. So these, you can find all of them, by the way, on Reddit, but I've reworded them a little bit just for clarity. So the first one is titled, Overwhelmed by Increasing Expectations for Promotion. So the person says, I started my new job, highly motivated, and secured a promise for a year-end promotion guided by my boss's advice. However, I'm feeling overwhelmed as she keeps adding more tasks to my list during our monthly meetings, which last over an hour. Initially, I was excited about the clear path to promotion, but now I fear I won't complete all the tasks by year end. Despite wanting to use these discussions to gather crucial information, I end up exhausted, just nodding along and taking notes. How can I manage these growing expectations and still achieve my promotion? Max, do you want to go first? What advice would you give that person?
Sure. I would separate into 3 different issues that I hear. Number 1 is that you are given what sounded like a promise. You secured a promise for a year-end promotion. That's number 1, driven by the interest to be able to trust the people we work with and to have our our word means something, right? There's a value attached to that as well. So that's important. I think that's part of identity to some extent, like what you're paid. It feels like how much you're appreciated, or how much you're worth. Second, I hear that there is scope creep in terms of the role, right? There's a conversation that needs to be had, or it needs to be named, that when I started, these were my responsibilities, and now we're here, and I have a limited bandwidth. And also there's a relationship between work and compensation, likely. And then the third thing is the way that we meet. When we meet, typically I leave feeling exhausted. I'm really just taking notes. I'm making the assumption with the which last over an hour that that's too long. So assert those needs in terms of, I meet best under these conditions. There's a possible that we could schedule 30 minutes for me to let you know my perspective, how we're seeing things and how things are going, and to address these 3 issues.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Max. Nicolas, how would you address this?
No, I would go alongside what Max said. I would probably just add, I like as well this sort of transparency and document. It's like, okay, we are going to go through, but that's the objective. That's what actually I should be achieving, and then to rephrase it and make sure that it's actually agreed. And I like when I have those type of relationship to get that onto a format that's actually something which is common and shared and understood. So it's almost like with a supplier, at each step of the negotiation, you document the progress. And it's a little bit the same. It's like, well, do we agree then on what we should be, or what I should be doing, what are my objectives, and then how I'm going to progress toward those objectives. And potentially you don't need actually that hour definitely to go through that every other week or every week. Actually, then you've got the direction, and you need to just stay in line with that.
Right. I mean, I think maybe the issue with the hour meeting is not so much that meetings are too long. I think it's because the meetings are just focused on feature creep, and it's just like adding more stuff. And so, of course, if you do that for like 2 minutes, then I guess you're not going to add too much. But if you spend an hour every month just adding new tasks, like, it sounds like a lot. I'd like for you guys to tell me what you think, but it's always really interesting to me because you could almost just say exactly that to the boss. Like it's explained.
Yep.
I mean, seriously.
Exactly.
Like if you look at that, you could go see your boss and say, this is my situation. I was so motivated. However, I'm feeling overwhelmed because you keep adding more tasks. I mean, it's exactly, you could just say that. And that's exactly right. Do you think that you could just go and see that, just say that to your boss, or am I wrong? What do you think, Nicolas?
I guess it depends of your boss and the relationship you have with. But I think for me, I think feedback is a gift. So yes, definitely, if I've got someone coming to me with that, I'll definitely listen and try actually to adjust. So it actually be a beneficial relationship for both of us. Now, it depends who you work with. Sometimes it's complicated and you might need to frame it slightly differently.
Yeah, that's very, very good. It's always really interesting to me that people are it's so easy for them to clearly articulate on a Reddit post, kind of like what the issue is and what the problem is, but they're just stuck at expressing it when it's their boss or anybody else. What do you think that is, Max? Like what's stopping this person from just seeing their boss and saying, I'm so sorry, with all due respect, I feel like we're adding a lot. And, what's stopping that person from doing that, Max?
I think that's the question. And I'm thinking about Elaine Lynn Herring's new book, Unlearning Silence, that talks about why and when it makes sense for certain people, either, in terms of weighing the cost benefit of raising something. Why don't we raise something? So I think I can see here already, even without knowing the situation, there's positional power, right? This person theoretically has an alternative of letting me go. That's fear-based. The question is not how afraid are you of that? The question is, what is the likelihood of that given where we're sitting, et cetera? So I think a lot of it is negotiation with self. What is your calculation? Was your experience having conversations like these? Probably it hasn't been good. And so I think at least at Mindful Negotiating, we hope to inspire and equip people to negotiate in a way that's corrective, that creates a corrective experience for likely poor, unskillful, and difficult conflict scenarios that people have had in the past, which stop them from wanting to even get into the, I don't want to say arena because it assumes.
It's not.
But I think it's the way people think about it, the fear, and that it's easier to avoid and deal with later.
But I think, a lot of times, people have this win-lose mentality, right? Which is like, I can't say no because she's asking me for more. And so if I'm saying no, it means like I'm not accepting the task she's giving me. And so I need to take it on myself. But the sentence I like is, I was excited about the clear path to promotion, but now I fear I won't complete all the tasks by year end. And to me, like that's really where you see that both of them are fully aligned. Like it's not in the boss's interest that you lose motivation and that you don't get promoted. They want you to get promoted. That's why they gave you like these, these standards and the promise for a year-end promotion. So explaining that although you realize and you want to be excited about all of this, you just worry that these are too many tasks and that you won't be able to reach all of them. It sounds very reasonable. Like it doesn't sound unreasonable at all.
Yeah.
Nicolas, I don't know if you have a.
No, I agree with that. And sometimes I think that it comes with maturity as well. With maturity, you've
Yeah.
got the ability to structure back to say, well, that's actually what we should be focusing on. The tasks you are adding are just distractions. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's actually a tough thing to say. But when with maturity, with seniority, you come up as well with a structured mind to say, well, actually, for me to be promoted, that's what you want me to achieve. But everything you keep adding, well, actually, they will not be helping to get to what you want. Basically, they will not help you to get to those objectives being delivered. So is it the wrong priority, or actually are we just diluting focus because that's you keep talking about what's on your mind on the day we have that meeting?
And I'm assuming, right, in procurement, you have that situation as well, right? Where like salespeople tell you, oh, but I want to deliver excellent quality, but with these requirements that you keep adding, I won't be able to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's where you need to be mindful as well when you manage. And it's mostly internal negotiation then as well. Everybody wants a Ferrari, but then at the end of the day, well, maybe you need actually only a GM or a smaller car, and then you just need to accept that. And then it's actually sizing the requirement as well, is that the focus should be on what needs to be delivered, not on actually that fancy things I want.
Yeah, it's funny. So when I started my job at McGill, they wanted me to teach a class that I didn't want to teach. And, you kind of have to teach a certain amount of classes, and that's part of your job. And my thesis advisor, so I was asking her, like, how would you decline? Like, how would you say no to this? Because I don't want to be seen as the guy who says no and refuses to do stuff and all that stuff. And then she said to me, explain that the reason they hired you is so that you can push your research agenda forward and get tenured, and the problem is like teaching this new class will get you further away from that goal that you both have, which is to publish your research and get tenured. And it was really very appeasing to me that I could find a way to frame it in a way that we're both aligned. It's not me denying something to you, it's me just contextualizing that if we want me to reach that goal that we both said, was desirable for both of us, I can't do that if we keep adding new stuff. We need to do that. But I agree with you, Nicolas. It's a matter of maturity as well. I'm assuming you cannot learn that after a few times, right? When like that guy, for example, is just assume that person never finds the strength to do it and then ends up not being promoted. Like that's not going to happen a second time. Like, the next time they'll say, I've been here before.
Yeah, but I like your example as well, is that you went and talked to someone. And
Yeah.
actually, that's quite a lot of people are not doing that. They keep that for themselves, or they talk to one person, but that might be not the right advice. Actually, there's plenty of senior people. There's plenty of people you know that's good. Actually, you can be bouncing ideas with.
Yeah, and also I think because they have this external perspective, and because my advisor was like a department chair, she was able to explain like, no, you're worried for nothing. Like, this is not how they see it. I do that a lot. For example, when students want to negotiate with professors, they have all sorts of assumptions about how professors think, and then sometimes they just tell them like, no, like, we don't think that way. Like that's not how people think. So very good. Let's go to the second one. So the second one is how to handle threatening language in negotiations. And so how can one negotiate effectively with someone who uses intimidating language, such as stating they will block actions no matter what? So this isn't about life-threatening situations, but more about aggressive opposition in discussions. Are there any recommended resources or techniques for dealing with this type of negotiation challenges? Thank you so much for your guidance. So Max, how would you deal with somebody who's kind of like black and white like this? Like, I will never do this. This is not possible and all that kind of stuff.
I just listened to Chris Voss on the Lex Friedman podcast. So I think if you asked him, he would just mirror back no matter what.
Right.
To get a sense of what do you mean? Definitely when someone is coming in, whether intentionally with what I perceive as aggression or whatever, that's the moment I want to slow way down. And I think you could say, what I think I hear in that is that it's something that is really important to you.
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
help
I mean,
me?
it's a really good point, which is, why is this person so emotional about this right now? Like, what are they worried about? Right. This is probably, you want to be able to zoom in a little bit and understand what the concern is. So I guess, yeah, so you would mirror it. You say, what do you, no matter what, like, what do you mean?
I personally, I'm not sure I would, for me, I think it's like a deeper topic, but like, I don't like, amongst like trainers that I work with, sometimes we say, don't tool me, right? Like,
Right.
don't tactic me, like,
Right.
regard me as a person and don't like reduce it to like tactics. But I think I would say, like, when I hear no matter what, I hear, and correct me if I'm wrong, the threat of violence, possibility of you quitting, blah, blah, blah. How close?
It's interesting. I was recently involved in something in my work where an administrative was in emails was being very kind of like, I won't do that no matter what, like, to somebody else.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting to me because I was just in copy of the emails, and so I was not involved in that negotiation. But I was always wondering, like, what's so triggering for her? Like, why is she so triggered by this?
Why not ask that? But to your point of like, oftentimes what people think, or like, what about saying that? It sounds to me like you're triggered by this. What's going on?
Why are you so triggered? Like, what's, why are you like setting the, are you worried we're gonna disrupt your boundaries? Like, is it what's going on? Because people, she was getting emotional, and it was just really interesting to me because it was kind of like coming out of nowhere. And so I was just wondering about that. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I had been involved in that negotiation, I would have said to her, I was like, oh, just tell me what you're worried about. I just want to make sure we're not in that situation. And just also to reassure her that, I'm not trying to like force you into something you don't want to do. Like, it's not the goal. I want us to be both happy with the deal. And so I want to understand why you have this response. How would you do, Nicolas, if you had somebody like who's kind of like, I will block these no matter what? Like, how would you deal with that?
Well, I think so agree with everything you've said, but I think we need as well sometimes to say no and walk away. And actually, that sometimes it's just not acceptable. And that's it. Well, your attitude, the way you are approaching it is just not acceptable. And people actually tend to accept behaviors that they shouldn't be. So that's probably one. And that doesn't answer really the question.
No,
but people need to think about it. They need to think about it as a matter of fact. Then there's a question about the content and the format. The content is what you want to achieve, and then there's how you actually are going to achieve it. And sometimes you need to disconnect those two things and say, you need to go back to what's actually the matter, what is the objective, where do you want to go with that conversations, versus, how is he framing the question and talking about it, and maybe that's not so important. The important is actually where you are going to end in that conversation more than the conversation itself. And it might mean as well that sometime you pause the conversation, you just go away, breathe for 5 minutes and go back into the conversation, because then the person will have cooled down and have a slightly different attitude as well. And that's what I meant by content and format. It's probably attitude and achievement, basically. And sometimes it needs a pause.
I agree. I mean, taking a break for a couple of minutes, getting a coffee, like is always a great thing. Then you can re-explore. And I do agree with you that if somebody is being very, very strict in their demands, then you have to think about, can we find like some sort of a common ground, or am I reduced and diminished to complying with whatever you decide? And I think a lot of people sometimes, they're just, so for example, right, you need to deliver it by tomorrow, no matter what, right? Then maybe I won't deliver anything then, maybe it's just not working out for me. I had this situation recently where somebody was telling me, like for a project I'm doing, they were saying, you need to do this, but you also need to do this, this, and that. And then I said to them, it was like, well, then maybe I'm not going to do anything about it. Then maybe I just won't do it, because like you can't. What?
So I don't know if you'll have to tell me if I'm off here, but I hear something that I do, which is going very quickly to alternatives. Like, don't tell me what to do. right? Like,
yeah, no. So the reason it was specifically about funding for something, and like the person wanted me to find like an alternative source of funding, and then I said like, then maybe the project is just not going to happen, right?
Yeah.
Like even though that's like desirable from your point of view, you know, that you would stop funding it. If you stop funding it, I'm not going to add 100 hours on my workload just because it's easier for you. I was saying like, what's going to happen is just nothing is going to happen. Like, you know, it's just, we're just going to stop doing that project. But I think, you know, you need to be able to walk away. But I think, you know, for that situation, particularly, like I'm looking at alternatives, but I'm not completely sure that they will stop, you know, doing that. And so I know that, you know, they need to think about it. I think they want to see an effort and they want to see something like that. I think when people use very like strict language like this, it's always like a bit of an overreaction. It doesn't mean that they won't be able to accept a compromise, but yeah, you have to be able to walk away, you know, to see if you can make it happen or not. Nicolas, I see you have. I don't know if you have something.
Yeah,
to
no,
say.
I agree with you. And I was thinking about your example, and sometimes there is a why question. Is like, okay, why do you need that? And then, well,
Yeah.
if you have that deadline, but maybe there is alternative, as you said, maybe that's only a partial elements of what is asked that you need to deliver by that date, and then you can scale over time actually the rest of the delivery. So I think the sort of questioning and listening is part of that conversation you need to have in those situations as well.
Yeah, or just even explaining to the person like concretely, this is not feasible, or concretely, this just can't work. You know, I know it would be great if it did, but it's just not. We can't deliver that. And so, yeah, definitely having some sort of a discussion like this. Okay, and so the last one, it's one that I really like, and so it's called renegotiating salary after lowballing initial offer. I'm being considered for a marketing consultant position at a Fortune 500 company. During an initial call with HR, I prematurely stated my salary expectation as $35 an hour, not knowing the range was $30 to $50 an hour. I realized immediately that I aimed too low, preferring to target around $40. With the official interview approaching and given the positive feedback from HR and a potentially limited number of candidates, how can I tactfully renegotiate my salary expectation to $40 an hour without jeopardizing my candidacy? So it's kind of like a shitty situation to be in. You know, it's kind of like the first piece of advice, of course, is to not do that, right? Like to not lowball yourself. But how would you, if you were like the person was asking you as a coach, you know, how do you deal with that? So maybe Nicolas, do you want to go for it?
Yeah, no, I think well, I think you've said exactly
Yeah.
what shouldn't have happened. Definitely talk about range and don't anchor a number, especially the first, without having looked at the market first. But then, yeah, I think that's actually quite a tricky situation. And I would say probably that would worth a conversation back to say, well, actually, I've had further conversation with some of your competitors or other roles, and actually the range would probably be somewhere around that 40 to 50 and probably a bit more than what I actually said initially. Just be relatively open to say, well, actually, I might have sold myself too low, but that's as well because now I've had better understanding of what the market is about. So if I go somewhere else, that's what I will get. So I just did it wrong.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Max, what would you advise this person to do?
Listen to Nicola. I think I do that. I think the teacher in me can't resist pointing that this is a beautiful lesson in winner's curse.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, and that oftentimes in negotiation we have to accept, like we have to accept that we're always learning, and it's only bad if we don't take anything from this. So I hope that this is a memorable lesson for being fast to commit on process, but slow to commit on substance. Right.
Yeah.
So this is an error. I think it's remediable if it's worth it, genuinely worth it. And I would do the calculation on, do you think it's worth it? I might say something like, hey, when I look at the market, I'm seeing X, Y, or Z. So I'm also curious where 30 to 50 range comes from, because I would take that objective third-party data, say, when I look around, this is what I'm seeing is fair. I agreed to 35 an hour, and I would, push comes to shove. If you're genuinely willing, I can do that. And I'd love to feel compensated fairly. This is what I'm seeing is fair. this specific number based on my calculation.
Right. So I really agree with you that there's really something about the winner's curse, which is, to people who don't know, which is when you agree to the first offer and then you realize that you could have gotten more. And so now, even though you won, you feel cursed because you think maybe I should have negotiated more. I know that there are probably several ways that you can go back on what you said and say it differently. I don't have that way. I don't know what I would say in that situation that would not make me look like I'm changing my mind or not make me look like I'm trying to get more. I think if that were me with just my own experience and knowledge, I would not contradict myself about the 35. I would say that I would keep the 35. I would say that maybe just seeing the 50 is like now making me think, oh, I could have gotten more. So there's like a bit of winner's curse. But I would say that I would add to during the meeting that I said 35 because I'm expecting to have, a performance appraisal a year from now and hopefully to be at 40. Like that's what I would say, so that I would not contradict myself and sound like I'm just saying one thing and the opposite the next meeting. But I have to say, I'm sure that there are a couple of ways that you can go back on what you said without looking like a liar or looking like somebody who's unprepared. But that's the way I would do it. Nicolas, what do you want to say?
No, I agree with you. Now, well, no, I don't agree with you, actually.
Okay, go for it.
Actually, I think I would definitely go back, but that's my personal view.
Yeah, of course.
But then what I think is for me as well is like we've answered that question like thinking about for 10 seconds. I think what I would definitely do is think a little bit more about it and rehearse a little bit the speech. Is that so you can then pitch with confidence that actually that's why you said and that's why you think it should be more, and then just articulate it a bit more and practice with friends, families, partners, whoever, to actually that it's going to be well received. I think the way you are going to structure your message back, I think it's going to make a huge difference. So I wouldn't just go in a 2-minute thinking and go in there. I would definitely practice a little bit that one.
And I guess you can also kind of use protected language. Like you could say, no, I said around $35. Like it was just a number I said like that. But I'm thinking about 40. Like, is it what you said? How would you say it? Like, how would you basically say, I know I said 35, but actually what I meant is 40?
I would definitely not say, go back to say, I said 35 and thought about 40. I think that would look a bit weird if someone was saying that to me. I think I'd probably put myself in the shoes of the person I would be talking to, is how I would be receiving that message. I think I would prefer someone to tell me, well, actually, I had a second thought after our conversation.
I thought about it.
Interviews, and then I think that actually the market is probably more around that 40, 45. So, yeah, I would probably position it that way. If someone was telling me that, I would say, okay, well, it's not that stupid.
Plus, you haven't signed anything, right? Like, you haven't signed anything. I mean, best way, by the way, to get 40 is to have a competing offer for 40. Yeah. Like that's the best way. If you say that you have some sort of an alternative offer and that they're offering you that, what would you say, Max?
Maybe. Yeah. And the reason I say that is, so like I'm obsessed with the 7-element model. Within the 7-element model, we think about alternatives saying no or commitment saying yes as like yellow light elements, like caution.
Right.
Like, be careful, because sometimes when people bring up alternatives, it escalates.
Oh,
okay, take it, right? Like if you have another offer, good, take it. I don't want to have to deal with someone who is pretending that they didn't say something they said they did because they want more money and not being honest about it. If you have an offer, please take that. That's the best for both of us. What I will say, and so like, I think understanding how irrational this is, like the behavior of punishing, like even though it's economically nonsensical, non-Pareto optimal, I'm thinking about like the capuchin monkey studies with grapes and cucumbers, right? We'll throw away a cucumber if they're getting a grape, right? It's not all rational.
Like you were fine, for people who haven't seen it, right? Like you just give monkeys like cucumber, which they don't really like, but they eat it up until they see another monkey getting a grape. And then suddenly like they refuse to eat the cucumber and they're like, throw it away back at the experimenter. But yeah, I mean, I think what's fair to say is I believe this person will probably never make that mistake again. You know, like it's a mistake that you make once. I mean, but it is a very tricky situation. It's kind of trying to salvage a situation you put yourself into. That's not great.
I might also just add, if I may, that focusing on interests is usually a good process. And we say there are no smart people, only smart processes. Your interest is to be, honestly, compensated as well as you reasonably can be, right?
Yeah.
In line with the market, be a person of your word, and not indicate to your new employer that you're going to be difficult. And so I think
Yeah.
if you name those interests and say, I'm thinking that one prospective option, Jan, is exactly the one you said. I'm wondering if we think, based on all these things that I've shared, that in a certain amount of time, 3 months, 6 months, whatever, we can take a look at how I'm doing and reassess, just like you said.
Exactly. And one thing that, I want people, because they always go straight to that, but one thing they should definitely not be doing is lying about an alternative offer. So I don't know if you guys have this experience, but in every single class that I teach, before we do a class activity, I have people who say, is it okay if I lie? Am I allowed to lie?
Yeah.
And I'm always thinking like, wow, like why would you say that? Like it means in your mind, like that's how you deal with stuff, right? You make shit up. But no, don't do that. I've really seen this backfire several times where people lie. And I think that's what you hinted at, Max, right? Where if you say, well, I have an offer for 45, and then they say, well, then go with it. Then go with it, right? Like that's amazing. Good for you. We're definitely not going to pay you 45, so you have a better alternative, and congratulations. Then what do you do? Because that's a fake offer. Do you think there's like situations where lying is okay? What do you guys think, Max? What do you think?
I think being genuine and telling the truth is your most sustainable negotiation style. Like to be genuine in alignment with things, and learning to do that as a recovering people pleaser. And Jay, and I'm just thinking, I add fawn to the fight, flight, and freeze. Fawning also just like it is also I think an adaptive mechanism. So I think it's not easy to do this. It's very hard, and it's something that even those of us who are masters or experts obsess about every day, and probably don't feel like we are actually. I think, so Roger Fisher, who wrote Getting to Yes, had a line that's something like, if someone breaks into your home and steals your TV, you're not obligated to say that to that person. There is also jewelry upstairs.
Yeah.
Right. So I think about this a lot because the distinction between negotiation being manipulative, influential, or collaborative, they're thin lines that are based to some degree on informed consent. So and persuasion is in that mix too. So I think truth is actually pretty difficult. Does it mean full disclosure?
That's the thing.
And that I don't think you always need to disclose everything, though I can definitely appreciate the compulsion to do it.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of times people get very nervous because they get asked a question, for example, how much are you paid right now? And their go-to is, so they're basically just thinking about either I say the truth and undermine myself, or I lie. And there's a third option, which is to say, I'm not telling you, I'm not disclosing that. This is, not, or, the role I'm in right now is not the same I'm applying to. And so my past salary is irrelevant to this conversation.
Or how many people have you slept with this year? Right.
Yeah, exactly.
An appropriate question. Right.
So are you better off? Like, you're definitely not better off. Lying, that's for sure. And sometimes, it's just, sometimes you also have people like who say, why did you do that? You have to wonder, like, maybe you don't have to tell the person, like, you don't have to answer every time, honestly, every single question. The one alternative is not to lie. Sometimes it's just to say that I don't feel right saying it, and you just don't say it. But I think what's hard with this is a lot of times, these conversations, they happen with human resources, and they're very good at making it seem like you should be saying it. Like, they make it feel like, but that's normal. Like, that's a regular conversation. Why aren't you sharing that? Right? Nicolas, go for it.
No, and I think you need to be prepared for that question because you know it's going to come anyway. So ranges, and there's different way to answer that question, basically.
Yeah. You don't want to be deer in the headlight, oh my God, I didn't know they would ask about my salary. That's always what I say when people tell me, no, but seriously, I always say, I was advising somebody who's like selling their company, and I was telling them like, what are your alternatives? And he was like, he was like, you know, kind of like that. And I was like, you need to know what to say. Like, you can't just, you know, they're going to ask you that, you know, if they ask you, you need to be able to say what you're going to do. You can't just say we have no alternatives. Like, you know, no, like you need to be able to answer something. But I think, yeah, this is why I think it's useful to have a coach, you know, somebody who can say from the outside, you know, they will ask you that, what will you answer? Because you don't know what you don't know, right? But the other person can say, no, like, what if they ask you for your salary? What are you going to answer?
Yeah. And just like therapists have therapists, I think good
Yeah.
negotiation people utilize a third-party perspective. I do all the time because we
All the
just
time as
can't
well.
see everything. And that's like, I think that's something that experts and masters we need to say more of, which is that I can't do this for myself. Like, I can't transcend my own limitations. I'm simply aware of them. And so I do something about it.
Absolutely. Okay, you guys. So we are reaching the end of the show. Thank you so much, Nicolas. Thank you so much, Max. Thank you, everybody who's been listening. Please go and follow Nicolas. Go and follow Max. You have the link in the description box, in the comment section. Follow them. They post regular content. They have all sorts of things that, you know, would be interesting to you. Also, join the giveaway. Max, Nicolas, I'll tell you who the winners are. I'll send you an email about it.
Cool.
And I really, really thank you both for attending and giving your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thanks.
Thank you so much, you guys.
And Nicolas.
Thank you.
Let me just play the jingle and we're going to go. Where is it? It's here. Have a good